anyone
This
that
meeting is being recorded.
Sorry, what?
It's okay. Are you expecting anyone that RSVP'd positively that isn't online yet?
No, I would say I have only heard a bunch of no's today from committee members. So I don't know, maybe let's give it one more minute and see what happens.
Okay. Well, it's been a couple of minutes. I'm thinking, Eliza, since we don't have a quorum, why don't we just cut straight to the needs analysis update? And I'll just preface that by saying that team at RiverCog has been hard at work as always, and has undertaken to compile all the questions that were sent in up to now, which are many, as you've seen from the 2-point font document we got. A lot on it. There's some responses to that there that we'll go through, and then there's also been some technical work done by Kevin to come up with a little bit different representation of the model in a spreadsheet with some. I won't steal his thunder, but there's some very useful features that have been added to it. I'll say that the scope for today is going to be on the determination side. So there's a lot of questions related to allocation that aren't going to be fully addressed in the update that Kevin and Eliza are going to give. Am I accurate in saying that, Eliza?
Yes.
Okay. So if we kind of hold our questions about allocation and keep those, if there are new ones, let's capture them and we'll address them in the, well, it's going to be the November meeting, next one already. Holy cow. So at the November meeting. So with that, I will turn it back over to Eliza for the, to start the update and also
Sure.
Kevin.
I just want to give you an update on quorum. We actually have 8. So if one more member joins, we can take care of the minute business, but I'll let you know if that does happen.
Thanks, Liza.
And one other thing I wanted to say is that David Rosengren from Essex sent me a nice note this morning that he did resign from the committee due to scheduling problems, but he wanted to make sure that I thanked you all for your expertise, and he said he learned a lot. It was a very nice note, so I think that he will be missed. He did definitely had some thoughtful input, but Thomas Pinkowicz from Essex will still be with us, so there's that. All right, I am standing in for Megan today because she is in Paris celebrating her 10th wedding anniversary. Lucky her. And I do have a little bit of a scratchy throat, so please don't mind my voice. One of the first things that I want to show you, and I'm so bad at sharing screen, bear with me here, is I'm going to do a quick summary of our regional housing plan. And the reason that I'm going to just run through that, and it's not even a real summary, it's just a few bullet points about what's included in there, is because of some of the comments that we received to the questions we asked. We thought it might be a good idea to recap that document to just kind of show you what's in there, because there were some comments about things that should be in the scope of the RHNA that we believe are already captured in the regional housing plan, and that maybe can contrast with what the methodology is supposed to be. So I think I sent this out to you yesterday, but there's a link to the plan at the top. Kevin, can you see my screen?
Yep, that looks
Okay.
good.
And then I included the YouTube link to the original presentation when we did the regional housing plan adoption. And so what I really just wanted to highlight are some components of that plan. It does include a housing assessment for the region with a market analysis and analysis of what the gaps are in our housing, provide strategies to address the gaps, target specific unit types. There's analysis of demographics, economic conditions, and current housing stock. Addresses suitability through infrastructure, environmental constraints, zoning, transportation, amongst others. It includes 8 30J appendices for 12 of our 17 towns. And it does include recommendations such as creating a housing toolkit, which many of you realize that we're actively working on, doing a TOD study, which we are actively working on right now through a federal Thriving Communities grant, and to create a housing committee, which is us. So one of the other recommendations is to complete the RHNA using commission-created methodology. So again, I just bring this up because there were some comments about including housing assessments and demographic analysis. So those things are part of the regional housing plan, whereas what we're doing with the RHNA is to really create a methodology to use to update when we do update the plan. Now I need to figure out how to unshare screen. I'm sorry, I'm so bad at this. Okay, hello. So the second thing that I wanted to do is to run through the comments that we received, which Megan wonderfully put into a matrix that I sent out to you. And I'm sorry it was so small, but we were trying to keep it horizontally to one page. Otherwise, it's kind of crazy to read. So I'm going to share that as well. We broke up the comments by category. We put them into general comments, and then how each of the determination and allocation questions that we posed were broken out. I'm not going to read all the comments to you. I think that's really tedious. I'm just going to kind of hit some high points on the responses. So before I do that, does anyone have any questions about the regional housing plan and what I just brought up with those bullet points? Okay. Seeing none, I will now attempt to share the comment screen. Okay, so when we started looking at the general comments, first I want to point out this second comment here. We did have some really nice positive comments, so we always appreciate those, and we always include them in our matrix because we love that. And I just wanted to say the second one about loving our presentation and that we're on the right track. This is from Don Poland, so that kind of made us feel like, okay, this is good. Like we're in a good space with this. So let me see. Some of the comments in the general comment section were about dealing with variables and about hiring outside experts to give input into some of these variables. Later in the meeting, you'll see that Marcos and Kevin have developed a really great tool for dialing in the 3 subjective variables of population change, household size, and vacancy rate that I think will help everybody really understand those 3 things, and that those variables are subjective, and they're kind of one of the part of answering the question about what do we want our region to look like. Excuse me. So we also had a comment on representing the final allocation numbers as a range. So what we're proposing to do here is to choose one recommended scenario for the allocation numbers for the RHNA report. And then we can offer a few other scenarios, which Kevin's going to talk about in a little bit as well. to kind of be illustrated by the tool and some mapping things that he's going to show you. But we did want to remind everybody that the final product for this is the actual methodology to be used in the housing plan update, not necessarily the allocation numbers. Like, that's great, but as Michael already pointed out, we really need to nail down the determination and have a really transparent reason for why we chose the inputs that we did. And I think somebody might have a question. Did anyone have a question or no? Okay. There was another comment in here that I did want to point out about preservation of housing, which we 100% agree that needs to be something that occurs in our region, but it's not really in the scope of the RHNA to comment on that. So we were thinking that the housing committee could provide recommendations as to such as when we update the housing plan. I think there are a few other comments in here that were addressed already in the housing plan, so I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty on those. And I apologize that this was so small, but feel free to blow it up when you're trying to read the responses. So the first determination question that we asked about was, what population projection model should we use? We had mentioned 1% decline in population, 1% growth, or 2.5% growth. And the answers that we heard were to use either 1% growth, 0% growth, or that we need more professional analysis. So what we're proposing is to use a range of -1% to +1%, or give like a high and low in the model. But one commenter did say, and we think this is on the right track, that there is merit to the idea that if we do make more positive regulation changes, then we can see the population projection trajectory change, hopefully for the better. And we really do feel like it's better to plan for more units than too little to get that healthy market feel. So the second question we asked was about the household size and if we should leave it at 2 or adjust that. So what we heard was leave it at 2. Another commenter said use between 2 and 2.5, and also to get some professional analysis on this. So you'll see in the response that Megan kind of recaps the case studies that other states are using, and we had determined to just use a more simple number than some of the other states that were doing like elaborate analysis with like age groups and family sizes. In the housing plan, the household size is 2.37. Marcos was able to grab a quick calculation as to what it is currently, and we're looking at 2.2 right now for the region. So it's continuing to shrink. And just anecdotally, I would say that staff that have been attending different housing forums around the region and the state have been hearing that housing size is shrinking from places like Department of Housing and AARP, amongst others, and it's changing rapidly. So that's one we just kind of need to revisit. We're still thinking of leaning toward 2, but we just want a definitive result from the group. So the third question on determination was on vacancy rate. We had talked about using 7.5, and the answers we heard were between 6 and 6.5 to use straight up 6 and to get more professional analysis. So Megan's response to that is that our healthy vacancy rate is not really a precise number, which obviously depends on many factors. And I think you'll see when Kevin shows you that tool that it doesn't really change the allocation numbers a lot. The difference between like 5.5% and 7.5% over 10 years is it's really not much. So that's just another one that we can revisit. Before I move on to the allocation questions, does anybody have any questions or comments about any of that? Bill, I see you.
Yeah, I would just say when you have any model with a bunch of inputs, if you're really worried about the accuracy of any one input, just for yourself, you could do what they call a sensitivity analysis and say change it by 10% and see what the outcome changes by. And if you change one input by 10% and it changes the outcome at 1%, you're really not too worried about how accurate that input is. And that's kind of a re-paraphrase of what you're saying about these numbers. The final outcome isn't that sensitive to the individual inputs.
Right. And you'll see when Kevin shows you that tool, it was kind of shocking to us how sensitive household size was as compared with the other two inputs. Kevin, did I say that correctly? It was household size, right? Yeah. Yeah. So thank you for that, Bill. Absolutely. Let me get back to my matrix here. Anybody else?
Yeah, Bill, this is Michael. I'll just say, I think for that particular one, for the vacancy rate, I had the same thought. And if you just look at the math, it's linear. So if you increase the vacancy rate by 1%, that just tacks on 1% onto the gross allocation number or the gross determination number that'll be split up. You're muted.
Yeah. So the variables to which the model is most sensitive are the most important to be aware of.
Yep.
Absolutely. Okay. On to the last three questions. So for allocation questions, the first one was, are the categories weighted appropriately? And I'll just remind everyone, we had it at 50% population, 10% transportation, and 40% activity centers. So what we heard was that activity centers should be 55% or more. We also heard, yes, they are weighted appropriately, and that we need some professional analysis on this. So basically the response to that is, this is really a question of our priorities. This is, you know, we had talked about during workshop 1, what do we want our region to look like in the future? Therefore, we really feel like you and we and the residents of our region are the experts here. There's not like a right answer that we feel like we could be pulling from an outside expert on this question specifically. And Kevin will talk a little bit more about the breakdown of the weighting of these as we move forward. The second question was, are the input categories correct? And it seems like most people that answered this question feel like we need more or a deeper dive into the inputs. So there's a pretty lengthy response here, which I'm just going to read it to you because I thought Megan did a really nice job with this. She says, based on the comments, we'll start by clarifying the inputs for allocation. Activity centers is comprised of the 3 data sets of jobs, services and amenities, and sewer and water. In our current model, these were weighted equally. Our outstanding question to the group was whether the 3 items are equally important when it comes to deciding where we should put housing. This is a question about regional and municipal priorities and objectives. Originally, sewer was included in the analysis because it was thought to be more conducive for building housing and accommodating more units as compared to land with only septic. However, it's come to our attention that the capacity of the sewer system may be severely limited without additional infrastructure. Therefore, it's not really serving as a positive factor. So for this reason, we're proposing to eliminate it from the allocation analysis. A revised allocation analysis was prepared to show this change. And we do recommend that a study be conducted at a future point to understand the capacity of the sewer systems in the region, and those that might be out of the region where our sewage would go, and interest in / cost to upgrade. So buildable land was also eliminated from the analysis because our methodology is looking at where we want housing rather than where we do not want housing. We don't want housing on non-buildable land. We do want housing where jobs and amenities are. If we're prioritizing locations where jobs and amenities are, it doesn't matter how much actual land there is available because there are a variety of new ways that housing can be added without building on new land or by building on small amounts of land. For example, adaptive reuse of existing buildings, conversion of large single-family units to multifamily housing, higher density zoning in prime locations, and low impact density, such as duplexes and ADUs throughout the municipality, These are all techniques to provide more housing with minimal land impact. Once a municipality has its allocation, it's up to them to determine how and where the units will be accommodated. Excuse me. Lastly, the affluence and exclusion in wealthier communities would be addressed in the equity adjustment. This adjustment does not adjust number of units, which is based on population and location of jobs, services, and amenities, but would adjust the share of that municipality's allocated unit within each income bracket. In other words, our wealthiest towns would see a majority of their allocated units fall into the 30 to 60% AMI bracket, but their overall allocation number would remain the same. This provides better access and opportunity for different people across the region while still targeting most of the new housing in places best able to support it. And that kind of rolls into the third question, which is, does the equity adjustment make sense? And we heard yes, and that we should get some professional analysis. So basically, I just said the end of that last response, but the equity adjustment is not changing the number of allocated units per town. It's just changing the suggestion of the units in relation to the regional numbers with AMI breakdown. And the AMI breakdown that we're looking at is very similar to the state and what has been used in prior plans. Okay, I like it much better when I can see everybody's square. Does anybody have any questions about the comment matrix, how we set that up, or any of the responses before we move on? Michael.
Yeah, just quickly on the sewer thing.
Mhm.
I think we might be throwing the baby out with the bathwater or something, less nice water, by just eliminating it from the model. The rationale for digging into that was that sewer existence doesn't necessarily translate into sewer capacity. And I think that's valid. But we've heard from developer after developer that sewer is it's a game-changing factor in the decision to actually, especially for mid to larger scale multifamily projects, they won't undertake them unless there's sewer. So I think we need to leave it on the table at least, and even if we don't fully understand it now, is to for now at least leave a placeholder so that maybe municipality by municipality we can determine where sewer exists if there is capacity, or there is some relatively facile way to extend that system. So
Yeah,
I just think it's early to eliminate it because, again, we've heard from all of these developers on how important it is. It's almost a gatekeeper to some of the higher density development that I think this plan is going to count on. So anyway, I'll leave it at that for now, but we can take it up again under allocation, but let's at least leave it in the parking lot to reconsider how we use it, not if we use it.
sure. And I think, some of the discussions that Megan and I had were absolutely, we agree with that statement. But it is not within our ability to do any kind of analysis on the sewer capacity right now. Like that's something that's like outside of our ability, our resources.
Right. So then even if we have to like leave it in the model and put a plug in there, just so it's neutral, but leave it as a factor. So when the data does become available, we also have reps from all 17 towns here. So maybe we can ourselves go back and say, and find out what kind of capacity there is and what kind of extensibility potential there is for the towns that have it.
Okay.
In any case, we'll talk about it more under allocation, but I think let's just don't eliminate it completely for now and leave a placeholder there to make sure we discuss it at the allocation meeting and not just at this meeting decide that it's cool to drop it.
Yeah, I mean, and like the other conversation that we had about it too was in full transparency. Well, if we can't say, yes, you can build here because, or you shouldn't build here because there's only septic. But if we can't say, oh, maybe you shouldn't build here because there's no sewer capacity, that was kind of like, well, then it's two places that we say no to. That's another reason we were thinking of taking it off the table. But absolutely, I think it warrants, further discussion. And Kevin, I don't know if you have something to say about it. I saw you took yourself off mute. or if you're going to talk about it later.
Yeah, well, the only thing I say, so definitely it's not, maybe eliminated is too strong of a way to describe it. So eliminating it as a factor, no. Like it's at the end of the day, that is something that's going to be considered. What we have difficulty with including it in the model is based on the data we have. The data is, where is it? Where do we currently have it structurally in the ground? But there's no way to determine from that data if just because it's there, it's a net positive or a net negative. We don't have a way of determining based on area of where the sewer or water is, whether or not expandability is possible. And that makes it really hard to include and say, because if you say, well, this area has sewer, so clearly it has a greater capacity to handle more sewer, that's not necessarily the case.
I agree with that, which is, like I was saying, just if we can leave it in for further discussion now, and even if at the end of this we plug it in as a neutral factor because we don't understand how to make it anything other than neutral,
right?
It's at least there.
Exactly. So if we were to include it, we would just have to agree as a group how to weight it. Right now we're treating all of our inputs as positives, so they're all weighted equally. So no particular factor is worth less than any other factor in terms of scoring. But yeah, so that's where it becomes murky. To leave it in is determining what value does it hold if it is a positive, and what value does it hold if it's a negative. So, but yeah, as far as its consideration for housing, yeah, you can eliminate it.
For sure. Bonnie, what you got?
Yeah, mine was, I think, because of Chester, we brought up this issue is that we have a very limited sewer that was actually put in because the sewer was being dumped into the stream behind Main Street. But so most of Main Street has sewer now. But I would agree with Kevin too. The issue, I think, is not, you said something like, well, if you have it, it's not necessarily, it's definitely a positive you have it for sure. I mean, that's what developers say. But if you don't have it, and I think there are a number of local towns that have fought it, so they don't have built. So if those that have a limited amount are actually being punished in a way that other towns who've chosen not to have sewer have maintained a situation where they can't, quote unquote, have more development. So I think the issues that we're raising, I agree it has to be considered as developers want to have it, but it also is a sense of just because you don't have it doesn't mean you can't put it in there to have more, to meet our housing needs.
Sure, thank you. Okay, if nobody has any other questions, I'm going to actually hand this over to Kevin to talk about the tools that Marcos and he have come up with, and will show us now. And before you do that, Kevin, I just want to tell Michael, we do have a quorum right now, so after the presentation, we can approve the minutes.
Good.
All right, well, I'm going to post the ugly link into the chat. So if folks want to play with it now, they can, but I am also going to bring the same tool up on the screen to show you. Here we are. So one of the things that was requested was that there be some sort of calculator, some sort of tool that would allow you to play with the numbers. But we wanted to make sure that we had all the components of future need locked down before we distribute that out to everyone. So what you're looking at now on your screen is a calculator that allows you to adjust the inputs of population growth, household size, and what we're calling the healthy vacancy rate. So it's not necessarily the vacancy rate that we have, but the vacancy rate that we would want to strive for in order to have a healthy housing market. And each one of these is a drop down that allows you to pull from various values. And as you make those adjustments, you'll notice changes in the equation and in what we're calling the regional housing unit need. So this isn't breaking it down by town. This is taking the whole region and just playing with the numbers. The inputs that are involved with this that are static values are the total current population, which is pulled, and again, all of this information is census driven. It's all pulled from census. So we have current population, the total vacant units as determined by the census, and the total seasonal units as determined by the census. We've discussed in the past how we wanted to handle seasonal units because they're not really a true vacancy, even though the census category or lumps them into that category. So for our analysis, we take our total vacancy, we remove those seasonal units, and then though that number, which is not displayed here, over the current existing units creates what our current vacancy rate is. So our current vacancy rate is 5.5% when you remove out seasonal units. So just going across the equation here, there's three major components that makes this all come together that gets us our number. It's the current need for existing units. So it's the total population divided by whatever the household size has been determined to be. And that gets you a solid number of this is how many households you need to house all of your households, minus what we know are the existing units. So you get a difference there of your estimated need based solely on population. The second area takes that existing units and applies what you need from the current vacancy rate to get to a healthy vacancy rate. So in other words, in the current pool of existing units, there already is a vacancy. But that vacancy may not be enough to reach the ideal. So we also need to add units to get our current stable vacancy up to a healthy level. And then in addition to that, based on the units that you're adding, you're now increasing the supply of existing units and thus messing with your vacancy rate. There's an additional added vacancy on top of what you have now added in order to maintain. So all that, it doesn't add anything above, it's not increasing the vacancy rate, it's just trying to create status quo. If you want the vacancy rate to be 6% and you add 6,000 units, you now need to add another 6% in order to maintain a 6% vacancy rate across the region. But yeah, so as Eliza alluded to earlier, when you mess with the household size, the numbers change considerably more drastically. To some extent, that makes sense. If you're cramming more people in a house, you need less houses. But even just adjusting that average by 1/10 of a person shifts the need considerably. And if we go to that determination, the 2.37, all of a sudden you're wildly in the negative, even with a generous population growth. And as I'm sure we've said in the past, we're not using this analysis as a way to bulldoze houses. That definitely isn't going to solve the problem. But it just goes to show you that slight changes in the household formation can greatly impact what the expected need is. Any questions from folks? Okay. No, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
This is awesome, by the way, and seeing the math laid out there really opens it up and it makes it transparent. So a question for you is on that middle term. If we want to take this offline, just say the word. Question on that middle term on how you apply the vacancy rate.
Yep.
Shouldn't that vacancy rate be applied to the future need and not the existing units?
It's both. So to break this down, the three bracket
Oh,
categories.
there it is. Okay,
Yeah, yep.
I got it. It was on the third, it's in the third term. Got it. Thank you.
Yep, yep. So we're determining how many
Yep.
units we need to cover population, how many units we need in order to normalize the vacancy rate, and then determining how many additional vacancies we need in order to maintain that rate.
Got it. Thank you. There it is. Black and white. Love it.
And yeah, so this is designed in Google Sheets just because it's easier to share globally amongst folks. You do not need a Google account in order to access and use this. You can just play with it. The equation is locked down, so you can't alter anything there that will mess up the numbers. You purely have access to changing these factors to see how it translates out. We can use this model in future years as new data arrives to continue to make these calculations. We're currently working off the most current census data that is available, which unfortunately is 2020. But that's the same numbers that every other organization is working from. So it's doesn't sound like it's as current as we'd like it to be, but it's par for the course.
I have a question.
Yes.
And don't hit me. So we're making these three basic assumptions for the entire region. And within the
Correct.
region, there are clearly very different real estate markets going on. For example, Middletown might be growing at 1% or something, but you might have somewhere with an older small town where there's been no new employment. They wouldn't, a 1% growth or 2% growth wouldn't be realistic to them. Is there any way to have each town be able to input their own variables and then we submit this in aggregate to one report? Or lacking the 17 towns or wherever it is, you do like 3 regions, maybe Middletown and the immediate suburbs, the shoreline, which is kind of its own dynamic too, and then
Right.
Middle Earth, where we're kind of away from everything else.
Sure.
And that at least you could stratify it 3 ways, assuming that the 3 regions might have similar patterns, but be distinct from each other. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I agree. The math is the same. It's just the inputs that you provide it, as opposed to doing the full region statistic. You would do just the town statistic.
But in aggregate, I mean, if you do Middletown at 2% growth, that's a
Right.
much bigger number than Essex at 2% growth.
Correct. The straight up percent growth, though, you shouldn't notice a difference if it's consistent. If you're saying, for instance, that you expect Middletown to grow by 2%, but you only expect Old Lyme to grow by 1, now it gets into the trying not to silo the towns. I understand the idea behind it. There's a reasonable understanding of what the growth would be for each town based on how they're operating. But I don't know if regionally, which this plan is scoped at, we're able to say, well, you're going to grow this much and you're going to grow that much. So right now, we just treat it as the region as a whole is expected to grow by an arbitrary percentage, just for the model's sake, to see what it would look like. But if the individual towns would like that tool just so that they can look at themselves and how that functions, that's fine. I could certainly make that, but I don't know from a posted plan standpoint if we want to get that far into saying how or what the change by town is expected to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, believe me, I recognize, getting this group to agree on population growth, multiply that times, I don't know how many towns there are.
Right.
No one's gonna agree on a number, but but the
Right.
question is, does it give you the ability to give a better data for actual town planning?
I think I'd like to reiterate what Kevin just said also, and to remind everyone that we are a regional entity. And towns can certainly look at this on their own, but then also as a region, and specifically as the small towns in our region, we don't have large enough numbers that I think it will extrapolate out that much, if that makes sense. And then also a third point is that the state itself can't even come up with a population projection. I don't know,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's like realistic for us to do by town. Just put that
So,
out
so
there.
in other words, if a town wanted that so that they could play with the numbers, I'd be more than happy to put it together. But it would come with a pretty big disclaimer that the smaller the area you take for census data, the bigger that error component is. Like you get a better realistic picture the more you summarize when you're dealing with census data, just because they're basically guessing.
Yeah, I would say it's more and more local guessing because you have
Yeah.
nothing else to rely on. It's like what the
Exactly.
realtors think are going on and whatever. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Bonnie, do you have a question?
I just was wondering, Kevin, if you put in the current household size that Marcos came up with, the 2.2, is it still a negative number for future? Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, even if you become really generous, yeah, it doesn't go positive unless we're adding a lot of people.
Yeah. Okay,
So,
thank,
Interesting.
yeah. I think that's going to be a hard thing to sell, perhaps, if our current.
right.
Okay.
But what that then drifts down to, if for whatever reason there's a shift and household size starts to go up, then I don't think this is a straight by the numbers. This is how many houses you need to house people
Mhm.
to basically put a roof over their head. This doesn't take into account housing mismatch. So one of the things that I wanted to lay out, especially with releasing this tool, is that if you reach a negative number, that could be true, but you could still have an AMI category that you're not filling. So you might have an overage of 4-bedroom homes.
Yeah.
But a severe lack of 2 to 3-bedroom homes or rental units or whatever the breakdown may be. So a negative number just says that you have enough buildings, but that building to person match may still be off.
Yeah, no, I think that the household size certainly is essential when we're talking about what new housing we need. But I'm just curious in terms of the total housing and how you rectify both of those or justify both of those. Thank you.
Yeah.
Daniel, do you have a question?
I was actually, I think Bonnie and Kevin said what I said about the mismatching, but I want to ask Kevin officially if he could create a version of this for the toolkit, because on our POCD we already have action items looking at our capacity, the sewer system, about all the, and I'm sure the other towns are as well. And this would just be one more great tool for us to look at right housing, So I'm sorry, and so that's basically what I'm asking, is not for the region idea, but just kind of looking at, we have a whole lot of this, maybe not enough of that. So
Right.
please.
Yeah, I'd like to see if that data is relatively reasonably available. I think it can be pulled from assessors data in terms of housing. But we have to take a deep look at whether or not we can make that calculation reasonably and not take too many jumps. Like the data has to be there. I
I'm
don't
looking-
wanna get into
I'm looking at it as a
position.
tool just for that because it was prefaced at the beginning of the meeting, the allocations. It's all old data. So
Right.
we're all aware of that, but that's also turning into one of our top priorities here. To
Right.
at least, because we're lucky enough, we're only 2.5% of the whole region. So because we are small, we might be able to find out some more data about ourselves and our neighboring
Correct.
towns that we do a
Yep.
lot of stuff with, Chester and Essex and Westbrook sometimes. So, that may not work for some of the larger communities because things get easily skewed. But
Right.
it could be helpful actually for us, I think.
Sure, absolutely.
One follow, I should, if I know this, I'm sorry, I don't. So is there a way to, to your point of, hey, the population growth may be 1%, but in the 40 to 75 range, it's declining, but we need twice as much on the lower either age or by income. Low mod income is growing, but the population in the higher income is declining. Is there a way that translates into housing units needed or types of houses needed?
That would be ideal. I don't have a model for that yet.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have all the needed data inputs to make that work effectively, because you would need the breakdown basically by income category, which I believe we have, because we initially wanted to use that for the equity component. The difficult piece is determining value of homes and how many fit into each category. I don't know that we've talked about how we would go about that. It just spitballing. I guess it would be based on ability to pay, but then we'd have to determine, is that assuming that you didn't provide a down payment on that house? Like there's so many factors when it goes into determining how expensive your mortgage is, that I'm not sure if we could come up with this is a one size fits all scenario that you're now going to apply. If we can determine that, great, I can put that together. But yeah, I don't think I should be the one to say you can afford this house or you can't afford this house.
No, I was just talking generally about population projection. I'm just trying to get some useful data to bring to like our Economic Development Commission and say, okay, yeah, we got plenty of 4-bedroom colonials on 1 to 2 acres,
Right.
or an excess. What we need are these,
Right.
2-bedroom, duplex, whatever. And based on what the population projection is, this is how many of these we're going to need. Stratified data on a local level. But okay, thanks.
The other component that muddies that a little bit is that it's not a one-to-one relationship either. So you can't say because someone makes this much money, they're gonna buy this house.
Yeah.
They could choose to live within their means and buy a smaller house, or maybe they don't want the upkeep or whatever it is. So it's really hard to nail down just based on income what housing you need. I think it's easier to go based on the affordability factor. So how much does a house cost? And then who's able to then even approach it from like a mortgage standpoint would be able to pay for it and not be cost burdened. But even now, how many people who are your neighbors that you think are doing great might actually be house poor, even though they make 6 figures. Like, yeah.
I would say the opposite of that is also a confounding factor. Like there may be a lot of people that are living in housing that's below their means, that we wouldn't know, and
Right.
that could possibly then move up, and then that frees up a unit. So and Carla makes the point too that there are other variables like age impacting your choice and your need as well.
Right. So I've thought about this same thought experiment, because it seems like the next logical way of, okay, now we know what do we build, but it gets really hard.
Thank you. Thanks.
Michael?
So on the same topic, Kevin, is there source data accessible that is stratified by, I know I've seen it by age bracket because we did some work on that for the school board. I can't recall if I've seen it, whether it was in the census data itself or some of the derivative data sets like from ACS. So there's definitely age bin. I don't know if there's AMI bracket bin. And I'm pretty sure there's census tract, at least, if not municipal borders for the forward projection. So I don't want to get into how we would use those data, but if those data exist, it at least gives us something to work with. Am I remembering the source data correctly on that? That there, again,
Yeah,
at least I've seen age and census tract, and I think I recall seeing AMI bins, but
yeah, I believe we do have all three of those, correct, Marcos? Where we have age breakdown and we also have a estimated, is it actual income or?
I'd have to take a look. I've seen something like that, but definitely age, definitely census block, census tract for all of the municipalities. I wonder if we could use the number of rooms as a proxy
for
for
the house value.
the house value.
Yeah, and real estate agents have that. So there's data that you can get from the real estate market that it will get you a histogram of home values. So again, I don't want to try and solve it now, but do we have like the traction in the source data to even approach it? And it sounds like we have some.
Yeah, we definitely have some, but yeah, we'll have to look back and see what we have on available to us specifically for income. I could have sworn we had already touched on that because we did a sample equity calculation, but I'm not seeing it folder. So I will get back to you on that.
Thank you.
Kevin, do you want to talk about the additional mapping right now, or
Okay,
we should go
so
back to those?
yes, so one of the, actually a couple of the comments we pulled from really wanted to take the analysis and break it down into smaller components so you can really see how it evolves instead of taking all of the factors and just smushing them together, show how that changes. So what we decided we're going to attempt to do is take the analysis. Population is very straightforward, but the other components of jobs, activity centers, and transit, we want to actually show that as it transforms. So what would the supposed breakdown of units from between the towns look like if you only considered jobs? And then run that analysis again with jobs plus the activity centers and see what that difference is. And then run it a third time with jobs plus activity centers plus transit. And basically so you can see that evolution and get a real understanding of how those factors affect the totals. We did decide to remove the water and sewer from this specific analysis just because we can't make a reasonable determination of whether or not it's a positive or a negative factor. So it muddles with the model. We're essentially only dealing with positive factors. So you have this, thus you get a higher score. And it makes the overall creation of the database much easier. Interestingly enough, I managed to reach the memory limit on my program and it crashed. So I have one of the maps, the jobs one, which I believe you guys have seen already. But when I tried to add more, it freaked out and now I got to rebuild it. But that's neither here nor there. But I will show you guys this one here. So everybody can see that map So this is just the straight up jobs per square mile data that says that this area, and these are brackets determined by, what is it? What is that jobs tool called? I'm blanking. On the map. I think that is what it's called, on the map, right?
Yeah, it's on the map.
It's census data, but specifically pertaining to jobs information, and specifically, how those jobs are distributed graphically, geographically. So, this is the tool here, and I don't know if you can still see, or if you're seeing. Can everyone see the map moving?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the tool that pulls from, and then this is just our component of the data, and that's the way they chose to break it down, 5 to 460, 461. So it's just, I didn't make that determination. If we, for whatever reason, decide we want to adjust those categories, we can certainly look back at that. But I chose in general over the course of extracting data from the internet to try to stay as baseline as possible unless there was a reason to change it. So this information then gets translated to another map, which breaks down based on the area coverage that you see now. The allocation gets distributed from that number that was in the spreadsheet earlier. So obviously, if you're looking at this map, you can see there's a higher concentration in Middletown, Cromwell, the shoreline, and then in the middle, you got a lot of empty space. Anything that's white is a zero coverage, null, or a zero. So when you add up all those values to try to determine what percentage of the total region allocation you get, this shows you pretty clearly why one town is given more than another. And then the exercise with this, like I said earlier, will be to take and add the additional factors one at a time so that you can all see how that breakdown goes. And then just pretty straightforward Excel work, taking the total regional number and then using this percentage breakdown to determine which town gets what. Bonnie?
Yeah, I'm just curious. So I noticed in this jobs per square mile, you go from 461 jobs to 1,828 jobs for a blue dot, which is a huge, I mean, for a small town, that's a big difference. So
Correct.
are your numbers really all relative between the towns? I mean, so it just, that's what concerns me in a small town. We could have 481 jobs in that blue dot, but we're being counted as potentially 828.
Right. Unfortunately, no, that is if you fall in the range, you count as the high and the low.
Right. So I guess the one thing that would be the case is that between the various towns, it would be a relationship with everybody else in the sense of,
Correct.
but it's not specific town. That, I mean, for these small
Right.
towns, that's a big range.
This is looking at concentration. In fact, the whole thing, all of it is concentration. So where are more jobs? And if you have less jobs, it is assumed that you need less housing based on using this as a factor. Flip side of that, if you have more jobs, it's assumed that you need more housing in order to cover that need. And that's why, again, I didn't change these ranges from the ones that were provided. I'm sure there's some sort of statistical normal breaks type of analysis that they're using to make these breakdowns based on distribution, because even the ranges they're not even.
Yeah. But it's
so
relative. But I'm thinking of two things. One hand is it's relative in the region, which is part of
Right.
what we're doing, but two, it's a big range. So those are the positive and the negative pieces of this. Okay, thank you.
Correct, yeah, so just because this is a yellow area, it might be on the lower end of the scale, yellow area. We're treating just that whole category as an equivalent store, or score.
Yep.
If you have anywhere within that range, this is how, you need housing that much more or less.
Right. But it's helpful to have this, this map to just show how we got to these numbers.
How
So
that's broken down, yeah,
Yeah,
because
I appreciate
the
that.
other way, it really gets lost in the averaging. Here
Mhm.
it shows you clear as day. This is the range, this is how much information is packed into that little space.
Yeah, thank you.
And if there's an issue with that, then that's something we can revisit.
Yeah, I think something we have to think about, but yeah, it's good.
Right. Okay. So I do apologize for not having the rest of that information for you. I hope to have all of that put together, the different scenarios. One thing I did want to, by bringing up this whole process, was, does that sound like enough? It would be most helpful for me in actually doing this analysis to have all the puzzle pieces and do it, rather than try to weasel in new factors later. So right now, our positive factors for housing are jobs, the relative concentration of activity centers, which is schools, healthcare, grocery stores, and other public amenities, such as your general downtown areas, where stuff is happening, your town facilities where you obtain services. And then, of course, transit, is the transit hubs, and that ties into the TOD development. You would most likely want to develop or increase in density around your transit stations. So those are your 3 Shoreline East train stations and your Middletown depot, for the buses. Is there any other factors that we would want to include that we are missing, that we haven't used up until this point? And of course, you don't have to come up with those now, but please do some brainstorming. And if there is anything we need to add that we can obtain data for, I'd like to be able to shoehorn it in before the next meeting. Oh, Bonnie?
So one of the things that occurred to me as you were trying this activity center piece and services is a tough one to calculate. And I am assuming that you have just sort of said, okay, one person has a school, so it's a 1. Are you just adding them, just because you have a grocery market, you have a 1, or how are you aggregating that data that would reflect? I mean, as I think we responded to say, okay, you could have your Westbrook medical center, but you could also have a that gets a 1 as a medical center versus a in Essex you have a medical group with 2 docs. I mean, how are you weighting this within that service center idea? Oh, this service center idea.
So it's based on relative closeness to every other amenity. And yeah, see, I'll show you this just to have a visual. So this is the old one. It still includes the water and sewer, which you can see those kind of squiggles in the background. So this isn't a true map of what we're dealing with. But the idea behind it is all of those things that I mentioned: schools, grocery stores, urgent care facilities. We have all of those stored as points. And those points can be mathematically related to each other. So in other words, it's an equation of how far away is this point from every other point that we're interested in. And that creates a heat map, which is essentially the density of those points. And the how we're choosing to score activity centers is really based on relative closeness of available services. So if you have a facility that's 2 miles, let's say, away from everything else, it's going to score pretty low because it's just not near anything else. And the theory behind that is if you were to build housing, a house that is closer to more things is going to be either more valuable or more likely to be built or want to be built than a house that's built out in the middle of nowhere that now that person has to travel to get to everything they need. So to answer your question on the weighting and how it's scored, it's purely based on the density of how much stuff that you care about exists in a particular area.
Okay. Yeah, again, we're a small region, so the
Right.
distance is I'm wondering if distance is really the issue. Initially, I was thinking that jobs was, you've got your jobs, which also is part of your jobs are one place, but if you're also working at the medical center in Westbrook, you have lots of jobs in that one location. So it's just a question of,
Right.
is proximity the issue in a region like ours? I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, it's
Right,
not-
it may not be, if there's a different way we want to approach that question. We can.
I'm
do
not
that.
sure how. I don't have another idea. I just was thinking, is that really the issue for where it could? I mean, I guess that is a decision of this group in terms of how far away do we want to get, if you're saying from Chester to Old Saybrook or Old Saybrook to Middletown. And none of these are very long, hard to get to places unless you don't have a car, which has something to do with our lower tier of, that goes into our equity issues. So it's just a question. I'm trying to get down to what these numbers really mean.
Right.
But thank you.
So, yeah, in this case, it is highly dependent on it's a distance factor. So if you have multiple available services in an area that are close to one another, you're weighted higher as opposed to if they're spread out. And yes, that again affects certain towns that have things closer together more. But the logic or the theory there, even regardless of income bracket, is that you want to be able to get to the stuff you need without having to travel the region. But
Okay.
I think too, it speaks to like our thought of preservation, right? Or like to build stuff where stuff already is.
right.
And to discourage sprawl. I think that's part of our overarching question of like, how do we want our region to look? And I don't want to put words in the mouth of the committee, but I think that might be a factor.
Liza, just picking up on that real briefly, I think we probably want to just compile a list of the guiding principles
Mhm.
that are above the data. What you just said.
Yeah,
being one.
I like that.
And the same thing goes for transit. It's relative distance from a transit hub. You get a higher allocation need, assuming that you want to build in close proximity for walkability to the train station. If that for whatever reason doesn't fit, we can make a change, but that is the assumption that's being made in using that layer, is that closer is better. Okay. Any other questions? And like I said, just to remind everybody, if there is something other than those three pillars that we're pulling from to juxtapose against population for this analysis, reach out to me, to Megan, to Eliza. And we'll see if we can put that together.
Nice work, Kevin.
I
Margot.
I am hearing that I may be a little staticky. Is that what's happening here? Can you guys hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay. So after all the things Kevin just said, I would love to bring it back to our 3 determination questions and just spend a few minutes on each one, not like belabor the point to death, but if we could come up with a household size, a population projection, and a vacancy rate that we want to choose as our one suggested scenario that we carry throughout the RENA report, that would be so helpful. And then, not discounting the other scenarios, we can include modeling of those as well, but we would like to just choose one that we can use when we're writing the report. So with that said, does anyone have any revised ideas or change their mind or want to talk further about using population growth? Again, to recap, we are planning to show a high, low, and a range between -1% and 1% growth. We had suggested going with the 1% as the model number. How are we feeling about that?
Eliza will speak. It's a little hard to respond to that without having, as I said, as I just asked about, is having the guiding principle. So how do we think about population growth? I know one of the principles you invoked is you don't want to show a negative number for the need, right? So
yeah.
To me, it seems a bit arbitrary. So because we know it's a range and whatever we pick over the fullness of time is going to turn out to be, at least to some extent, wrong. But anyway, I'll stop at that.
Yes, I would also interject that all population projections could fall under that comment, right? Like anything that the state comes up with could also fall under that comment too.
Yeah.
So I think we just need to pick something. And Daniel, I see your hand up. I did like the comment. I think John Guskowski said that if we are able to simplify or like make more positive some of our interactions with our regulations and job growth and things like that, then we could maybe count on the 1%. Who knows? I don't know if we're being optimistic with that, but I'll just put that out there. Go ahead, Daniel.
The issue, and I had mentioned it to you in a sidebar, as my purpose for calling you, is that our projections aren't just off a little bit. I mean, the disparity is large. We're looking at a 2-digit negative in growth. I mean, not a -1%, -2%. I mean, and of course, as was just established, our data is very skewed, which is what we're all trying to get to the bottom of. But that's my issue. Just whether you say it's 0.5 or 1, that's great if Middletown gets 1,000 more families and grows, but it's just so far away from what Tom called Middle Earth. I like that. because that is kind of, and I can't even speak to the committee members over at Old Lyme and East Lyme. I don't know what their projections are to their individual towns, but we aren't talking like, well, it's growth and it's going to be maybe only 0.2 and our area as opposed to the more families are. It's a huge disparity. So I don't even know that to set anything in stone without figuring out a plan to represent that.
Well, also, I don't think we're setting anything in stone. I think we're talking about using an example as a narrative through the report on the methodology is what I'm talking about. Michael, do you agree with that statement? And
yeah,
also,
it's saying
any
that our little
allocation
town,
numbers.
We don't have room for 200 new units, which is what the original draft. And I'm not saying it was that. I know we kind of like that was the throwing stuff on the wall to get the model working, and that's fine. But we just don't even have the physical space unless we built a tower, I guess, on the river. And I don't see Gateway allowing that to happen. It's just that I think that as a narrative, it's misrepresentative. I mean, it just isn't really representative of the region. If only a very small fraction of the region is actually increasing to any volume, and that skews the rest of it. I mean, it's just so disparate.
Right.
I mean, I think we just had, it goes back to inputs. We just have to find some stronger input, or maybe even tier it, or maybe even divide the region.
I think
For the plan, in
I think
purpose of
we
the
really
plan,
want
you
to.
know.
I think we really want to stay away from. I mean, I don't know. I wish Megan were
Yeah,
here
but
to answer this question, but
we can't just manufacture a report so that it doesn't show anything. I mean, the fact of the matter is we need to know if it's going to be negative somewhere, or if it's going to be migration, or if it's, I mean, we need to know that. Just putting something in there to
Right.
say, well, positive, wink, wink. And as, again, you and I discussed the sidebar, what we do want, it isn't that we aren't going to need any housing, we're going to need the right housing, right? And so it might be a matter of, yeah, we have plenty of units, but none of the elderly people that live here can go upstairs anymore, right? So, I mean, I don't know what the solutions are for that, but that's kind of the direction that we need to look at. I think it's probably the same in Essex and Chester. That's, I don't want to be troublesome. I'm just saying that just declare it 1% just isn't. I don't think it's representational at all.
so what do you think we should do about that?
I'm thinking that we need to come up with some other kind of methodology, or look at some other inputs. I'm putting it to the commission to kind of bounce it around. I mean, maybe
Okay.
somebody else has a better idea. I mean, the only idea I had is like maybe tier the region. You know, it's still Rivercar. It's still the same region, but maybe there's shoreline and maybe there's inland, and then there's us in between, and that might give us a true representation of where the needs are. An example too, on the shoreline, we know that we have a lot more seasonal housing. You know, the units there. I think it was important to say, yeah, there's a lot of housing there, but it's seasonal, or you know, of that type. So that in itself, you know, becomes a marker for the shoreline region.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I mean, bring it back to what was said before. Maybe it goes by current household room size. You know, what is in the middle portion versus inland and shoreline.
You know, maybe
Yeah, I mean,
you know, like Eliza says, you know, I'm struggling with a good number, and you know, not just put one in there,
It's tough.
but you know, it is a regional plan, so that's getting through my head, and that's what we're tasked to do. But if we give each town like the tool and say, fine, this says 1%, because that's consistent maybe with what Connecticut, or like you said, Eliza, other studies have come up with, adjust it for your town, you know, and say, hey, take it, you know, this is the regional plan. We have a little bit of a way to adjust what we think is our need and for our planning purposes and our zoning and, you know, schools and everything, and we move that number around. Then at least you have a starting point to maybe modify the data for your locality, and that's a more useful.
I totally
way to
agree,
move
Tom.
forward.
My point was that I don't feel that it's a little, and you know, we're going to do the work to figure out, you know, to try to get a better number, because at the time that our numbers were put together, it was basically from pre-COVID information, you know, like a lot of this stuff. But I mean, our numbers are going to radically affect your numbers next door, because that's what we're going to look at. Like, are we going to put money to get more capacity in the sewer system? You know, and you know, and that's the sewer system that feeds Essex and feeds Chester. So, or the water system. So that's why I think the fact that it's such a disparity, I find that very troublesome.
Yeah, the
So-
takeaway I'm getting is that, you know, there's the comments made, you know, it's not the number of houses you might need, it's a type of housing.
Yeah, yes.
And you know, clearly we have plenty of 4-bedroom colonials around here. What we don't have is something else. And that's, I'm going to try to take something from here and bring it to the commission and say, you know, here's where we can go forward.
Before I call on Bonnie, I just want to reiterate too that each of your towns has its own 830J plan. And that is where you can look at your town more in depth.
Yeah.
You know, so that's something to think about. And then also the point that this is really, the product that we're coming up with in the arena is the methodology. It's
Mhm.
not the number. That is icing on
That's
the cake,
important.
as we talked about earlier.
That's important, right?
Yeah.
That is key. I guess the reason why it bothers me that it's skewed is having an equal balance with Middletown, and showing a really high number, then that becomes a driver. I just don't think that it helps in the end if we have an inflated number for. I mean, not that I don't want all the goodness for our community, throw it at us, but.
No, but I mean, I think also like we need to look at the region. Like Bonnie was saying before, we're small. It doesn't take long to get from Middletown to Deep River. We are a unit to some degree, and it's not just Middletown that's growing. It's what was the shoreline town, Kevin? It was either Clinton or Westbrook.
Right.
It's Middletown, it's Cromwell, it's East Hampton, it's possibly Portland. So yeah, there definitely are disparities, but we are trying to look at this holistically. And in it all, there's so many other variables. It's not just population. There's jobs, there's other things we're looking at. So, not to belabor the point, but I don't know. I think we need to just look at it as more than the sum of its
bringing the methodology
parts
back, bringing the methodology back to the town, because that is the primary purpose.
Right.
It needs to be something that people can look at and take seriously, and if it's so skewed, then what was the point of the exercise? Say, oh, it's good for middle. Yeah, but it's as a region. Yeah, but we are building, as Kevin pointed out, what's buildable land, what's unbuildable land. Some of the area. I'm just not sure it's representational to have growth across our region. Now, I don't think our region is unique in that, but we have a city on one end and the shoreline on the other. There's three very different sets of numbers that really should be represented.
Would you propose using 0% growth as the number?
No, because
Keeping it
there's still
relative.
going to be growth up in Middletown. I should hope. I want there to be growth there. I want new business. I want everything. And I consider the region that is part of our community too, because I can drive there in 20 minutes. What I'm saying is instead of having one number, one equal number for every
Right.
town, maybe it should be 3 sets of numbers, and then the total need. So say it's, just to not get too crazy with it, say it is 0% for 5 towns and 2% for 5 towns and 1% for 7. Let's say now we got our 17. Then we have a more accurate total of need, and then we total those up, and I'm thinking we'll have a different number than if we just put 1% across the board.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I hear what you're saying, Dan, and I think we can do the best of both worlds on that. We'll have to bring this all back to our ringleader Megan, who has a greater bead on what this plan is supposed to achieve, which is why I think there's some pushback against breaking it down to the town level.
Yeah.
But there's no reason why we can't have a tool still that allows you to see, okay, here's the region as a whole, and then here's the breakdown, so that each individual town can basically turn the dials to what makes sense for them.
I don't disagree with your statement. I'm just going back. I think that if you look at each of the towns, you don't want to end up with 2 radically different of a number. You might want to say, well, we did the whole region, we come up with 7,000. When we break it down by town, we find, well, it's actually 7,200, or it's actually 6,800. But I don't think that's where we're going to end up.
No, but your point is because maybe Middletown grows by 3% and Deep River shrinks by 1%. Like that can happen in the same year.
And it also gives us goals, because again, the multi-factors, and as Thomas pointed out, these are things that we take back to the economic development commissions and say, hey, look, what can we do to, achieve our guiding principles for our town, right? It's like, we need a new shoe factory or such, right? So that was just my suggestion and my issue with where it's at. But given it, and with the preface of the conversation, is we know that the inputs faltered, and we all want the ideal input. And I would like to think that at some point we'll it'll come somewhere in between. But I still think that the methodology as it's set right now with one growth percentage across all 17 towns isn't, and I don't think it needs to be broken down into 17. I think you know, I'm happy to give it, you know, it could be this side of the river, that side of the river, you know, maybe it could be 5, but I think 3 is more representational, because when you look at the maps that you shared with us, I mean, that's what you see, right? The activity centers, and then in the middle, there's a couple dots where, and we all know what that industry is, right?
Right.
And so I mean, you aren't going to build anything in Contra Ponce State Forest unless we show, maybe that would help. We showed a need to, yeah.
You know, just an observation, as we're contemplating using a single number to come up with an aggregate need, we're talking about determination now. So we're doing the gap. There's another step, which is allocation. And if I remember correctly, population, the actual population growth of a municipality plays back into that.
Right. Well, that's what we're putting together too. That's on our action items. Whoever else is putting together their POCD, you know, I think we're all on the same page. What we're looking at locally, and then it's gonna collide with the regional. And we don't want. I would like the regional plan to come back, and I want to say, oh yeah, look, this is, you know, I would like it to be closer.
Gotcha.
So determination is going to define the pie, and then allocation is going to cut it. And population factors in the size of the slice. So I haven't thought through all of the ramifications of that.
Well, I think this is solvable. I mean, the inputs is always the followable part. I don't like being the doomsayer or whatever. I think it's awesome what we're doing. I think it's going great. I appreciate everything that you have going. I just think that one number to rule them all, that doesn't work in Middle Earth. We know that.
Mm-hmm.
We know that.
Bonnie, what say you?
Well, I was just thinking that this is a committee that is committed to having housing and addressing our housing needs in the region. But the idea here is I think we have to be realistic in terms of, I think you made a comment, Eliza, that we want to have more housing than less. We'll never get more housing than we need. So we really need to be practical in terms of what it is we truly need. And I guess I haven't seen from Don Pullen or others, and maybe Kevin, you have, that our population in this region is going to grow in the near future. It seems to be shrinking. So to put something in saying that we are growing 1% isn't really necessarily going to sell us on this project that we're working so hard to achieve. Mm-hmm. So I really want to be practical. And if in fact we have a negative growth over the next few years, 0 is as high as I would go, in order to try to say, I don't want to inflate the numbers so that people are just going to turn off the final product. And so that we want more housing, we want different housing than we have now, to address the population needs and growth. But I really don't, I don't know if I could go above 0 unless you can tell me that for the region, there's a projection of a 1% growth over the next 10 years.
And that's, I would probably defer to the housing plan that we had already passed for the region, which has the Don Poland full analysis that fortunately shows just that, where the trend line is to the negative.
Right. So go 0 in my view. Don't go 1. Let's not inflate these numbers so that we then have as it is, even with a 0, because it depends on the household size, we're still going to show that we need housing. And to me, it's the selling of this to the point where we can get housing that meets the needs of a 1 or 2 person household. So I don't want to inflate to more than a 0.
I hear that. I do want to hear from Ben. I just want to interject that it's 3:30 and I really want to be cognizant of everybody's time. Most people have already dropped off as well. And after Ben's comment, I'd like to talk more about household size, because as Marcos reminded me, and as we saw in the tool, that's really the most sensitive factor here, more so than population and vacancy. And if we can get through that, I might be able to finish up some of the rest of this by email. Go ahead, Ben.
Thank you. I want to first just commend the committee for the amount of time that you guys are spending, everyone on this call is spending looking at this methodology and thinking about this. I do want to encourage everyone, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I think no matter what way you slice it, I can't imagine a region growing if there's no options for people to move into. And I think historically speaking, in the state of Connecticut, we haven't seen a lot of construction go on, and we certainly haven't seen a lot of construction go on in the River Cog region, at least in my time that I spent researching there. So one exciting thing about the planning process, which you're all doing, is and I'm literally been writing a script and presenting on this on Thursday's housing conferences. It gives you this opportunity to be futurists, to think about the communities that you want to create, the communities that you want to leave behind when you're no longer here, and set pace by way of planning process, the direction of that future. And obviously, the River Cog region is a complicated one. It's quite large. It's terribly highly populated. It has a concentration in an urban center, but then quite a bit of dispersed remaining population. So as you continue to look at this, like I said, I just encourage everyone to be futurist and think about the changing demographics, think about the changing household size, think about the changing needs that people look at for their housing when they're searching for it. From a department agency standpoint, we believe that there's need for housing of all types at all price points, really, pretty much everywhere in the state of Connecticut. And we're seeing shortages across the board. So as you continue to do this, really, I encourage the COG particularly, and I appreciate everyone's hard work on this, because we're having internal conversations at the agency about looking at these types of long-term plans and strengthening these plans and strengthening these documents to think about the ways in which we allocate resources as well. And I'm not saying this from a standpoint of inflate your numbers so that there's an artificial need. I'm saying it from think about the future, think about where you're headed, think about where you could be headed when you're thinking about these sorts of things. And it's exciting to see you all considering all of this. And again, if anyone needs assistance or has ideas, particularly I'm seeing things such as professional analysis and need for some further dive into this data, to the River Cog staff, feel free to reach out to me too if there's resources that we might be able to support by way of the agency. So keep up the good work, everybody. It was great conversation, and I just want to encourage everyone to keep doing what y'all do.
Thank you, Ben. Household size. Who's got something to say about that? I'd love to hear it. Michael, did you unmute?
Yeah, but I didn't have necessarily. I'll just read off the top of my head to you, which is similar to the population growth. And Bonnie, I agree with you. I think 0 is the right number as I'm thinking about it. The demographic trend in household, everything I've seen, everything I've read is going down. So I know already in Old Lyme, I think we have like 70% of the population is 1 or 2 person households. So the future is now in terms of smaller households. So whether that plays out to 2 or 2.25, I don't know. Got to average in with everything else that's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the demographics in the housing plan support that too. And I think anecdotally, we can all see that we are an aging region, and that usually translates to smaller household sizes. And also another plug for that 2 number on our end is that is capturing some of the undercount we talked about, about like doubled up people and in other ways that people are undercounted in the region. So I like to, but it's not up to me.
I think the challenge is that the shrinking household size doesn't necessarily translate into the need for more units. It's different units, because it's not just a growth in smaller households. It's a shift from larger households to smaller households. So I haven't thought it through on how shrinking households translates into the number of units you're going to need. It's more the type of unit you're going to need. So that the whole concept of redevelopment and reuse just keeps coming back to the center.
Yep. Anyone else? Household size? Okay.
No,
If you, oh, go ahead.
no, I'm just thinking out loud. No, I agree that that's something we discovered as we did the work with the tool, just like tested all kinds of variables, turned the different knobs, the dials to like see what it is that it's telling us. And a very small change in the household size has a very large impact up and down, whether or not you need more houses. And you think about it, you have to build more houses for people. Working with Kevin, we're still trying to wrap our heads around this. Like I brought up the number of rooms, which we have readily available, that kind of data for each town, whether or not that could be a proxy for some way of showing like the right size footprint for the right that we're looking for. So that is something that we're exploring, trying to find how to connect the right data that we have to plug into the right tool to kind of get data that's useful for us. So that is something that we've been trying to put together on our end. Yeah, that's all. Just a quick update.
If I may, I think that this is where the units do become important to show a need, because with the idea of like in-laws living in a house, and that was one of the things that was mentioned earlier of what brings it up to 2.37. But if they're living in an ADU, then now that's a separate unit, isn't it?
Yes.
Right. So, I mean, and it's one of the things we're all trying to establish, I think, in this region, is be able to identify the ADUs and find a way to document them, and then maybe do something for our individual towns. That's a big driver here towards our solutions. But what will we do in the case that so grandma's living, but it's not a full ADU? Is that a special kind of housing, or is that like a 1.1 unit?
I don't know what you mean. Explain that one again for me.
Well, if you don't have a whole ADU, right? Like if you haven't been able to, do an addition or convert, say instead, your living room now becomes, grandma's bed. Maybe it's hospice for the next 2 years, or which is a thing that's happened a lot, right? How do we? Is that something that can be accounted for? I mean, the ADU is simple because we can say we're trying to set up a way to do that. So we can say, yeah, I have an ADU, and then we can certify it, make sure it's being used, right? But if somebody is doing some form of elder care, right? Is that something we could use to advantage, or is it just blatantly? I mean, because otherwise it becomes 2 point. That's what was pushing up the household number, and that and returning students or children, right?
Mhm.
So that's my question: is like, would that bring it down if we say, well, no, we're gonna have ADUs, move that out? I guess that would work for returning students too. If they're living above the garage.
Right. And I think that was the rationale behind choosing 2 versus like 2.5, because that does incorporate some of that undercount in there. Does that make sense?
To actually account for that with any certainty, there'd have to be a means of collecting that information, whether it be the assessor keeps track of that, but just as you said, grandma comes and crashes on your couch, or could just be a friend that comes by and sleeps on your couch for a week. There's really no way to keep track of that reasonably. And I would say probably from a census standpoint that those people are not being counted to begin with.
Yeah.
I guess that's what I was trying. Is like, do we count them or not count them? That I could have articulated that in a different way, but it's hazy to me overall.
But the census data should show a non-transient multi-generational household as just a bigger household size.
Right.
Yeah, as far to answer the question about the unit, just having a room that you rent out to a family member, or even if you're not getting any money, you're just letting them live there. that's still the same structure, still the same house. It doesn't become its own unit. It's only if you were to actually register your ADU as a separate housing unit because you wanted to be taxed differently, that it would end up on anything, really. Otherwise, you have rooms in your house, you're free to do and put who you want
No,
where you want.
no, certainly, but you just identified my point. Is like we are good in our town. We want to find a way to identify where people have put in that effort and they're supplying that
Okay.
service, right? And it is different, which is why than just like, oh, move back in your room now that you're back from school. I thought it was gonna be my new office, right? But you answered that fine. I was just, because what we're trying to figure out here by saying 2.0 or 2.2, it's going to again change. I mean, I was kind of amazed by your model how much it changes, right? So okay, well, definitely 2, I guess. Yeah.
Right, and there it's the carrot versus the stick, and I guess each town can choose how they want to approach that. But to actually get folks to report that that's what they're doing, there's going to have to either be an incentive or an enforcement. Good zoning enforcement is already a fun job, so adding that to that plate would probably not go over well on either side.
Yeah, but for the ADU portion, I mean, I think a few of the towns, I know that's an action item. I plan on, if the methodology succeeds, and we find a way, I'm going to bring it back to this committee so other people can adapt.
Sure.
Because I think it's going to help our other numbers. This is only one factor, a bit, not affordability side.
But yeah, if you were to determine that some of your need is being covered by those arrangements, then yeah, that would totally affect what you're looking for, or what you assume your actual need is.
Yeah, exactly, Kevin. Thanks.
Go ahead, Bonnie.
Sorry. So clearly the household size is most critical for the type of housing we will need to build. I think somewhere in our report, that has got to be a critical thing to say. But I was thinking about where we are now at 2.3, and then Marcos research to say, no, we're 2.2. And also hearing Don Poland saying we are moving toward a smaller household size, and the fact that anything greater than 2 ends up being a negative number, I'm okay with landing at 2. I mean, I think we can justify it. Again, I'm looking to see how we can justify this as our final product, but it clearly is household size of 2 is critical, not just for our determination, but for the allocation and what we're going to need are the smaller household accommodations and households. So I could live with 2.
I don't know, Bonnie, if the household size is not really going to be 2. So if it's a 2.4 now, or Marcos if it's 2.2, I don't think it's going to get to 2, especially in a no growth. We're basically talking about age demographics are going to drive the household size, not growth. So let's just look at the case where if we did 2.25, just arbitrarily, and it did show a negative, then it would be incumbent. If the purpose of this is to plan, then the way that would enable planning is to say you don't need new units, you need to convert units and adapt.
Right.
So my instinct is to not plug the number because we want to see the need to build new units. We want to deal with a reasonable projection of reality and let that guide the planning. And it may not be in every area that you need to build. It may need to be, you have to do more adaptive reuse. Anyway.
Which Michael gets back to, it would be really nice if we could come up with a way to reasonably break down the existing units to say you have enough in this category, so maybe that's where your negative is coming from, but that still doesn't mean that in this particular income category that you're short, say, 100 units.
Right.
I don't know that we've figured out how to do that reasonably.
Yeah, but people are willing to put in the work.
Oh, I'm sorry. Daniel,
But
go
to
ahead.
your point, I mean, even just to maintain the household number, let's say it really was 2 here. And in
Mhm.
5 years, to maintain 2, just in my neighborhood, I know people who are gonna move from their 3 and 4,000 square foot homes, they wanna go down to a 1,800 unit
Mhm.
or shared condo that's smaller in size. We need to build those units. They're not here.
That
That,
don't exist.
or to put it differently, the demand for those size existing homes and non-existing homes is going up.
Mhm.
The household size isn't changed. Same 2 people move across the street or, half a mile away. There needs to be development. If on the one hand, you feel like you're playing with the numbers just so it doesn't show negative, but there is a need for new homes, new housing. Now what happens to the existing 3 and 4 bedroom colonials? Hopefully you get some people coming in, and that will be population growth, but I mean, they're not gonna bulldoze them.
Right.
But there is that demand. People are moving. I mean, I know several people who've just moved and downsized and they want to stay around.
It's a good point.
But there's a lot to do just to maintain that 2.0 in number of
Right.
new
It's
construction.
it's already clear that we have an existing mismatch.
Yeah.
We don't want to exacerbate that.
This is outside. I just want to say though, you know how we have Middletown as like the anchor of a job center? I was thinking also like Old Lyme, and I don't know if you experienced this, but I mean, to your east, right on the edge of that triangle is a lot of jobs in Groton that are coming in. And if you're down in Clinton and Westbrook, you're more influenced by a demand in New Haven
Right.
than Middletown maybe. So we have on each, in a triangle, we have job centers that are big and 2 are off the grid. Only one gets reflected in our, view. So, if you're thinking about population influx, huge job growth in New Haven and Groton might filter into the edges of our region.
I agree, Tom. Actually, there's a question on the grid, and I had asked that. How do we think about the Groton, New London, and New Haven and Hartford even?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the answer to that is the state should be. But also, I mean, if you look in the regional housing plan, you'll see a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. Like Don Poland did a pretty good job with those things. And to Daniel's earlier point, he did break our region down into 3 different subregions when it came to the market analysis, kind of like shoreline, middle, and northern. So there is some existing stuff there. And Michael, I don't want to step on your toes about this meeting, but I feel like we're getting really late.
Well, I just want to say one thing to Tom.
For the minutes, right?
Yeah, everybody's gone.
Okay, so we can just wrap up this conversation and adjourn.
I just want to, before we go, I think I agree with Tom, but I think, Tom, what you're going to see is hopefully those larger houses that we're going to allow those people, if we build those 1 and 2 unit condos, whatever, that the larger houses, maybe you'll get those people from Groton and from New Haven to come to fill those 3-4 bedroom houses that you have in Essex.
And those are the move up ones. Whoever's in the 1,800 square foot homes now are going to go somewhere, and maybe their family's bigger, so they move up,
Yeah, so I think I'm okay with 2 still.
Really quickly before we go, we didn't talk about vacancy rate. I'm going to send out an email probably tomorrow, kind of like summarizing everything since we did lose most people, asking some more questions. And one other thing that I'm going to send out, I don't know if I'm going to do it right now, is Michael brought up a great point about people on the committee talking to, and some of you have already been doing this, and thank you so much, but talking to your other committees in your town. So we made it like a 1-pager that might be useful to you. Like what is the RHNA, what it is not, why are we doing it? And then included on there is going to be a QR code that will bring you to a folder specifically meant for housing committee reps with information that you might be able to use to talk about those things. Although as I've been thinking about it today, I don't know if it should be a QR code or just a link. If you're really, it's a QR code's only really good if you're like printing it out. right, Kevin?
Yeah,
Like if
we
you're
could probably
looking
do
at it
both.
on your phone, a QR code isn't
Right.
very helpful.
Yeah, we could do both.
Yeah. Okay. So be on the lookout for those things coming from RiverCog.
Great.
And Michael, I don't know if you have anything else.
No, other than that, to thank you guys for all the hard work that's gone into it. If we've established anything, that this is a complex and nuanced issue, and it's going to continue to be a brainer.
No, thank you, everyone. I appreciate your input. We'll keep crunching the numbers and come back to you next month with some more questions, I'm sure.
Well, thanks
Yeah.
for explaining everything too. I mean, it's.
Yeah. But thank you for all the RiverCog, all the work behind the scenes. And in a month, every month, you've come up with some more stuff to think about and have worked really hard. So and met these deadlines, which is pretty impressive. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry I keep asking for more, but I hang on the edge of my seat every time you show us a new map or a new something. And I am very excited about the work that's being done, but it keeps opening my mind up like, well, how can we get it closer to what we need?
Mhm.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for sticking with us here.
Well, there's nothing to adjourn because we never called to order. Because we
Yeah.
didn't have a quorum.
Yep. So I'm just going to stop recording.
Okay, thanks.